Okay, so we are here and we're going to be talking again about the mental obsession, but largely what we're talking about is the absolute nature of existence and the absolute nature of life and the essence of the fullness of greatness that we all share if, in fact, there is an infinite source of any sort. It would be what we are based on right now and the essence of our experience right now, not at some other time we need to get to, we need to find, we need to go to, we need to act better to realize. It's simply the thinking we're doing about our thinking that preoccupies our attention. So we're not paying attention to the absolute nature of our existence. And that doesn't mean that absolute nature changes or goes away. It simply means we're ignoring it by being preoccupied with what we think. And I would suggest it within the obsessive thinking as a mental illness, we think it's all that there is. So we think insanely about our thinking to imagine that it's everything that there is. And so keep going back to it for more and more and more of the same and wonder why things don't get better. So Melissa just asked a question about grief, and I would suggest that grief is that to imagine the grief is something that happened in the past that's impossible to ever get to and change, since what's already happened can't be changed. It's already happened. What's ever happened has happened, right?
Right.
So it's not something that can be changed because it's not happening. And to miss that point is to think we can go back and think of it differently to fix it, when in fact, it again creates grief to imagine we're not where we are now to have to go back somewhere else that doesn't exist. And now the presence is filled with grief over the idea that we feel disconnected, feel like we don't belong, feel like we need to get somewhere else with someone else and more or less of something else, constantly thinking that this will someday happen if we just keep thinking about it harder. And I would say there's no greater present traumatic stress than trying to make believe that we are capable of creating reality and thus at the same time denying reality. That's the compounding effect of addictive thinking. You hear that?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do.
So it's what we're doing is just beginning to have a conversation. Every time we start, we're always starting. It's always new. We've done it now for a couple of years, maybe a little more than that, publicly. But the point is to begin to do this in person with others so that we can begin to notice that we are not very good at doing this with the other people in our lives.
Why is that?
Because we make believe that the thinking is true. So the thinking we act on, speaking is a function of thought. Actions, outward actions are all based on thinking. So thinking is primary. If our thinking is sick, we're going to say things that reflect that sickness and see things that reflect that sickness that aren't actually happening, but we imagine become all that is happening. And that's the addiction to thought. Think of it in relation to alcohol or drugs or anything that you've had a compulsion with. It seems like the only thing you can do is that thing. When doing that thing, is the wrong thing. I would say we knew it all along. We just acted like we didn't because we were hoping someday we would be proved right by doing more and more and more of it, that we could control it, that we could enjoy it, and that it would save us from the experience we're having, the internal experience we're having that's conflicted and struggling and feeling anxious and depressed and very uncomfortable. It's very disturbing to feel those things. But to not notice that those things are accurate, it's like standing in front of a mirror with a costume on that's horrifying and arguing with the mirror to take the costume off. And that's what we do when we think those things are happening to us rather than being caused by us in our thinking, and starting to track back and say, oh, my human experience is largely being impacted by my preoccupation with thoughts that I wouldn't be preoccupied with if they were true, because I wouldn't have to think of them any more than a minute, a second, because truth doesn't need to be perpetuated in thinking since it already exists in its totality. So if I'm expressing that, I don't have to keep thinking about it because I know it's always available. I can pick up that thought anytime I want. I don't have to chronically think about it. So the only thing I'm thinking about chronically are lies, ideas that aren't true, masquerading as truth. And it goes on and on and on. That present traumatic stress isn't post-traumatic because it's not about what happened in the past. It's what I'm thinking about the past presently that's causing the problem. So if I'm grieving and continuing to create an environment of grief, I'm going to think the grief about the situation from back then is impossible to resolve because I'm constantly, chronically recreating the grief presently and not noticing that that's the only place I ever choose anything. It's the only place that I ever do anything. And it's the only place that anything ever happens, wherever anything ever happens, is the present right now. There is no other place, there is no other space, there is no other time, because I would suggest it's not even in time. It's absolutely the witness of the grace that I originally mistook for the grief you mentioned, the word. It's literally grace in the present moment, the freedom, the absolute knowing nature of an absolute essence that would be our nature. So that's it. We can hang up.
We're pal.
What's that?
We're pal for the day.
The addiction to thinking is a tendency to go back to thinking that's simply based in thought rather than notice that we have a knowing awareness that isn't based in thought. It just knows that it knows. And if it weren't for that knowingness, we would never notice the suffering we do is something that could be stopped or should be stopped, because it would be the only thing we could do, and we would be used to it and think of it as the highest capacity that we were capable of. But we don't think of it that way. We know something's wrong. We ask for it to stop as though it has a life that we're not perpetuating. And it's beginning to notice that we're the creators of that. We're the thinkers of that. Bye, Gabriel. That's causing the impressions that lead to depression as we maintain them longer and longer. And to make believe because we keep, this idea that a lie repeated becomes true is exactly what we think. The longer we think something, it must be true. Otherwise, we wouldn't have done it so long. Which, think of that. It justifies continuing to do it in the name of not noticing that the freedom of the moment is always allows us not to do anything. We have no obligation to do anything at all, ever. That's what freedom naturally is. What does that also mean? That we can do everything. What does that also mean? That whatever we're experiencing is primarily being generated by what we are thinking individually. And as a result of what we're thinking of everything else everyone else is thinking and everything else that's happening everywhere isn't what's actually being thought by other people, and it isn't what's actually happening everywhere. It's what we're thinking about those things that is impacting us. To start to see those things as the same as our knowing nature eliminates the thinking, because it just becomes a united absolute field of energy or whatever it is that's completely synonymous, one thing to the next, completely indivisible in terms of definition or divisibility or conflict. There's no possibility for conflict in that because there are no parts or pieces. There's no things to rub one another the way that we have a tendency of doing between our own experiences and relations. So it isn't reality and truth that we struggle with or suffer from. It's our ideas about reality and truth and love and this absolute state of knowing that we struggle with.
So the question was, how do you deal with grief?
So I'm presuming you don't think I just answered that.
No, he doesn't.
You don't?
No, Anthony doesn't. I think I heard that all moments are in this moment. Grief is an expression of part of the past or something you're not going to have in the future. And I think, my uncle passed away from cancer 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago. And, everyone was really distraught. We got together and we had a little luncheon with some music and some videos of him and stuff like that. And it was a great celebration of life. There's definitely some grief about, losing someone, but it was nice to take a look at the past. And he has 21 great grandchildren. So it was a beautiful thing. There was obviously some grief, but there wasn't much grief. It was kind of like a celebration of life, which I think is what you are in line with, Jack, of, death is a natural transition of our life form. And that grief is about, missing something that may not, that's going to be in the future, having had it in the past, but the present moment remains of they're not here.
Yeah, and listen, missing people after you've gotten used to those people is a natural phenomenon. But turning it into they're dead and they're never going to exist and they have no other basis than that body that I saw them have and that I smelled and touched and hugged and held and wanted to see more or less of, is again the idea that all I am is what I think. And as a result, all I am is a brain, and all I am then is the body that holds that brain, and all anybody else is a body. When we all know right now that every one of these bodies is going to transform by breaking down and disintegration of all of its parts and pieces that create the form, will not go anywhere, actually. They just basically return to the essence of their essence, the elements that they represent, whatever that is. Everything breaks down. Entropy, which I believe, Gabe, you can correct me, but entropy basically is that breakdown of things, matter. So it doesn't mean we don't have the right or can't miss people. I miss my father. I know that what I miss are the thoughts about him that I have, and what hurts often are the thoughts I have about him that aren't true, not his being gone, but my unwillingness to recognize his ever-present state is present now. And that takes a minute. That's a bit of a practice and an exercise to come to terms with that. But if I'm coming to terms with it in my own thinking, with respect to my own body that I cherish so much, when I think all I am is what I think and have a body, and I think I'm afraid of dying, I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of letting go of the ideas that all I am is what I think. And as a result, all I am is a brain that thinks, and all I am is a body that is guaranteed to be dismantled at some point. So if I'm thinking dishonestly about it, I'm trying to think I'm afraid of dying someday. Well, what I'm really afraid of is letting go of the idea that who I am is what I think, and the fear that comes in that thought. There's no fear in reality and truth whatsoever. There's no fear in an absolute source whatsoever. The fear all comes from my awareness that what I'm doing is creating fear. Why would I create fear? Because it's wrong to think wrong is right, to think what is false can be true, to think fantasy is reality. I know better than that because the nature of existence is sanity rather than insanity. Or at least we could probably agree the nature of existence is not insanity. The definition of sanity varies, but it certainly would qualify as not being insane. So thinking that what's happening that isn't happening is happening so much as to think I'm grieving it rather than what I'm doing in the present is a major misstep and a major bit of oversight, because it creates a new conflict to imagine I can't be where I am. How much more isolated and disconnected could I possibly feel than to imagine I don't belong where I am, which is the only place I've ever been and can be? just as everyone else is, as humans anyhow. Spirituality isn't based in a place, it isn't based in a form, it isn't based in a time. It's an absolute state of being and awareness and knowing. So if that is absolute, we can't be exceptions to it. We can't be separate from it, but we can think we are. And it's the thinking about that incorrectly that we think is correct where the conflict is. So Melissa, the issue isn't about pretending the past doesn't exist. It's about starting to see that thinking about the past is always simply done in the present. And our memory, I would suggest, has every memory of everything that's ever happened. And you hear people talk about these near-death experiences and that they say, my life passed before me. It's interesting that we allow ourselves that experience when we're in the face of dying, and yet claim to be afraid of dying while we're actually diminishing the capacity we have for life in the present. And it isn't actually that we're diminishing it. We just imagine we're diminishing it, so we act accordingly. We act dysfunctional. We create problems. We create conflicts with others so we can blame them and shame them and feel it's not the blame and shame that we are due, but they are due. Everything gets reversed in addiction. We think the only thing we can do is the worst thing. And if it's the only thing we can do, we don't think it's a choice. That would mean it's our nature. And it's not natural to kill ourselves, since we naturally die. At least the form that we're carrying around, this life form, expires. We have an expiration date, just like food does. Used by certain date. Best, I think it's, what does it say in the cans? Best if used by certain, so why would we wait till that ultimate reckoning if we're not ultimately reckoning with it now and making believe we're not, which is just another insane idea that we're generating off the basis of thinking that the content of our thoughts is reality and truth, when in fact, conflict is evidence we know something's wrong. We wouldn't know that if we didn't have a greater sense of knowing. Just like light wouldn't be obvious if everything was white light. There would be no obvious nature to the distinction between light and dark because it would just become the absolute nature of existence. Wouldn't be considered dark or light. It would just be what it is, which is, I would suspect, exactly what it is. So some of this may seem a little bit highfalutin and a little bit academic and so forth, but the essence of it is so simple that it's just starting to notice that each of us have choice, freedom of choice. And if we use that freedom to feel condemned, it's the choices we've made. If we look at the effects and start realizing that they are mirror images of the cause, we can start at least admitting that we're absolutely responsible for our experience, and then maybe even start to see that responsibility isn't a negotiable option for existence. It's the nature of existence. And responsibility is the ability to respond, meaning for humans to interact rather than interreact or react at all as a knee-jerk, automatic, defensive move. There is no grief. There is no grief in reality and truth in an absolute sense. There is certainly grief within what we call reality and truth, within the world we think we live in, based on the thinking we do to come to that conclusion. But those are
great explanation, Jack. Thanks. Where does destiny play into this? I never asked that really, or not much. But what about some people think that no matter what they do, it's not going to change anything, I think.
Well, it's interesting to mention that, Anthony, because think about what you said. No matter what they do, nothing's going to change. That would be a certain awareness of an unchanging presence. Wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So I would think destiny is like the past. It's something presumed to be the only thing that can happen, when in fact what's happening right now is the only thing that can be happening. So this is our destiny right now. To think of it as something in the future and not notice that it's absolutely the sum total of what it is, again, shows how quickly we start looking out there rather than noticing it's here now. And this is, again, just human experience that we're talking about. How do we as humans begin to function better rather than develop ways to refine the dysfunction and making believe we need to feel better about it and get over it and run from it and escape it and blame it on everyone else and everything else? Those are all just delusional attempts to make believe that within the fantasy we create to begin to imagine our thoughts are real, we're going to create a new fantasy to imagine that we've created the devastation and now we're going to fix it by pretending it's not there. And somehow we can get away from, by pretending it's real enough to get away from or get over. It's just a delusion. It's just an idea thought to be reality. It's not true. Lies do not exist outside of brains. Cows, you were talking about animals, Anthony. Animals don't lie. They can be deceptive to get food, very clever, like foxes and all that stuff, but they're not lying.
How about the ones that use a phony lure to catch another fish? They're off the top of their nose is a little thing they dangle to make it look like another fish. That's deception still, not lying. It's deception.
Well, it's just all animals have the urge, all organisms have the urge to survive, all of them. And built into those urges, like I talked about the goats hanging off the edge of this cliff on the tiniest crack, you could see them moving down slightly just by their hoofs a little bit. I mean, the hoofs like 90%. I
saw that, yeah.
Did you see it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the dogs, all they really had to do was just push them over one time. It wasn't that far of a drop, but they don't think they really realize that.
Well, but they knew if they went any further, they wouldn't be able to go back.
Yeah.
Because
how about the coyote that pretends it's wounded so that your dog chases them and the coyote runs back to his pack and then your dog is trapped? I mean, that's lying.
No, it's cunning.
Cunning, baffling, powerful.
Think of how things have developed to try to survive. They become clever. They use misperception to lure something in. You know, it's like a fisherman with a hook. It's not a lie to have a hook at the end of a line with bait on it. You know,
that's alluring.
That's how exactly. That's how you catch a fish. But again, this internal lying is what we're talking about. We're talking about the fact that as far as I can tell, there's no species that lies other than humans. And if there are, then it would be somewhat obvious that it's something distinct rather than something absolute.
I always remember a friend of mine, a funny guy, he said he lied his whole life. He never told the truth. When he was a kid and he got in trouble, he found out that he lied. He got away with it. So he said the only time I ever told the truth in my life was to my attorney once. He said, because he promised me that whatever I tell him, he cannot divulge. I thought that was pretty funny. I don't remember what he said after that.
Well, listen, to the degree that we make believe who we are is what we think, we are liars and imposters.
Yeah.
And make believe we have a self born of thought that we can talk to. I am talking to myself. Think of that. That's like two people apparently living in me. And as Jen and I talked a little bit before we started, my experience has been every one of those thoughts I have that I maintain has its own voice.
Yeah.
Because I think it has its own life. And all of a sudden, I've got a clamoring of thoughts going on in my head. And I think it's voices in my head as though they represent something real that is attacking me rather than giving myself that impression so I can claim I'm irresponsible for creating them.
So you're saying you're using all those people living in your head to help you build stuff instead of tearing it apart. You're teaming them up together.
Well, no, they're just voices reflecting lies that are speaking out so I can have the impression that they're happening to me rather than being caused by me.
So can you give an example of like what one of them would say?
Well, you think in that direction for a minute.
Mine says, do not eat that. I had a real problem with food the other day. I'm trying to lose weight and I just couldn't. It was like a bad dream. No matter what I would eat, it was making me hungry. It was like a bad dream.
But think of that, Anthony. Do you think it's a good dream to imagine who we are is not who we are and then think it's all we are?
Well, I agree with that, but that's not good. But I saw a show, one of these ads about cortisone. It said your testosterone is what's controlling you're not able to lose weight, and if you have too much, and so I'm like, okay, I'm going with the science on this. It's not that my brain isn't strong enough to say don't eat
You
that.
see how you're looking for excuses to take
Yeah.
yourself out of the loop?
Yeah, the cortisone. I'm like, that's what it is. It's this damn cortisone. I've got too much
Now,
of that.
do you think your body's incapable of creating that drug, or is also capable of creating it deficiently based on the deficiency of your own thinking?
Apparently, everything.
I mean, if we're capable of creating the conflict, we're capable of suffering the consequences. And if we're capable of pretending it's happening to us, we're capable of acting irresponsible for it, which perpetuates it, which turns into obsessive thinking. And it's thinking that we think we don't know. So if you have a knowing awareness, Anthony, let's say you already know the answer to all of the questions you ask. But many of the questions you ask are coming from insane ideas. So there is no answer to those questions. And to answer them is to think they're actually on a quest that can be achieved.
Yeah.
So at some point, it might be worth noticing, like this point now, maybe, that compelling interest to constantly ask questions is the idea that somehow those sick thoughts will someday be realized and somehow find their way, and you will be able to turn them into reality and truth and finally be settled, rather than start to actually witness that conflict that you experience, which you talk about often enough for me to mention, is in fact.
It's kind of like watching Batman and Robin and hoping this time the Joker gets away with it, right? You know he's going to get caught in the end. Batman always wins, but the fun part is going, I don't know, this plan looks pretty good.
And yet you continue.
Yeah.
Okay, so do I, to the degree that I maintain any of those thoughts. The only difference maybe is that I notice very quickly when the effect is disturbing and the effect is alarming and the effect is a repetitious droning numbness that often leads to a sense of self-pity and all that other kind of stuff. I know that what I'm doing is thinking something that isn't true and imagining I have a self to think of that I need to correct, rather than see that the delusion of the idea that there is even a self in me that isn't true and real needs my help. The one that the essence of I is reality in essence. It can't be anything more or less.
This is great. Because I go down that track of just blaming why cortisone this instead of realizing it's just all kind of a conversation about nothing.
Well, yeah, it's Seinfeld.
Much to do about nothing.
It's Seinfeld, but it's not that funny. So, Anthony, if your present nature is present right now, and it's beyond question because it's not in doubt and it's not uncertain, and you haven't paid much attention to it with your thinking, and you've paid a lot of attention to the thinking about the thinking that you've been thinking about for as long as you've been thinking and thought that was reality, it would make some sense that you might have a tendency to continue to go back to that thinking and think if you think about it further and ask more questions, you're going to resolve those questionable questions that are unresolvable.
Or the easy out with, I don't have a choice. How many people say, oh, there's nothing I can do about it. All right. Yeah.
But think about what you were about to say first. You don't have a choice.
Yeah.
If we didn't have a choice, why would we choose to say that? We actually choose to use choice as an excuse when choice always, by its nature, allows us not to choose. Because it's a principle. Within the human experience, everything has an opposite, except what's absolute, where the opposite is the same.
Except no opposite.
So everything in human endeavors, good and bad, up and down, in and out, there and then, all of those things have opposites. There means not here. Then means not now.
Yeah.
Right? So they all have opposites. To begin to notice that is to begin to see the seamlessness of the absolute nature rather than think of those things as
the seamlessness in the absolute nature. Now, that's good. Rather than what?
Rather than think of those things as distinct and the position we take become the only position that can be taken. instead of realizing that when we take any position, we're confirming all other potential possibilities and positions that can be taken, which
It's
means
like using calculus on life. Instead of just having one dot there, you've created an arc and the whole spectrum.
good. Yes. Yeah. So this is sort of yoga or calculus. The calculus of flexibility is noticing that if we can feel better about a thought,
Yeah.
if we can use feeling better and start to feel better, we've actually admitted simultaneously that thoughts are extremely flexible, to be movable every time we decide to do something that gives us a different impression. Now, I'm not suggesting that's the solution, because all we're doing is sort of working on the teeter-totter back and forth and trying to bring it into balance. But it certainly gives you evidence, absolute evidence, that thoughts are not intractable. They're not impossible to stop any more than the eating is, Anthony.
Yeah.
The eating is,
Or-
think of the fact that we started eating very, very young. It was very satisfying to us. It's something we've done, like breathe. If somebody said you'd stop breathing, that would seem impossible, right? It's the same with stop eating.
Yeah.
It's not that we're asked to not eat. It's that we've turned eating into a sport, like drinking becomes a sport, and any other seeming overconsumption seems to be a sport. I got to have more. I'm competing now against them. I've got to have what they have. I got to have more than they have.
Yeah.
I have as much as they, all that kind of stuff becomes this comparison and contrasting. Rather than saying food is actually designed for nourishment. And if I'm eating nourishing food, I guarantee you cannot sit down and overeat broccoli. And if you try, you're going to know that you've overdone it. You're going to see
Right.
it, feel it that way. But if you sit down to eat potato chips, one of my faults,
Yeah.
it's very hard. I love them. I even say that, and that's wrong. I don't particularly, but I use love in the name of vain to justify continuing, because I like the crunch. I like the salt.
I like the crunch.
But that's not true. I really hate feeling subjected to this thing I can't always seem to control. But what I know is that thinking the hatred is so true is to make believe that now I have something to hate, is to just start to see that it's just a position I take in relation to something that I obviously have some thinking about that isn't true.
Yeah, and I can see how strong my mindset is, because I know if I take anything home from the grocery store, it's going to get eaten, right? So I try to stop it at the grocery. It's like, I just know, do not bring that home. But I can see my mind kind of slipping. Like, well, I'm not going to eat the whole, I'm just going to try a few of those. I'll get the bag and just have a couple of those. And I know that we're going down a slippery slope.
So let's think of it in terms of food for thought. If we're eating healthy foods, we have a tendency to know when the body will say thank you, because it's actually being nourished rather than fed food that has no calories but tastes good and crunches good and all that kind of stuff. And the body's saying, okay, thanks for that, but now I need some food. Give me more. So you see the addictive nature in it. Even the body is telling us by its own record and accounting.
Or let's take it somewhere else that's more personal for me. I'm trying to clean up. I realize that when I see something messy, I look at it every day and say, I have something messy. If I clean it, I go by that same place and go, God, it is so clean and beautiful. So I've got to have it clean. I've got some storage things. I'm cleaning, but it's not finished. And so the mental talk I don't like is, you can't finish this job. No matter how hard you try, you're never going to have everything clean. There's always going to be something somewhere. Just accept that.
So
and I don't
Anthony,
like that.
In your willingness to see this something is distinct to you, you're avoiding the common nature of this way of thinking that is common to all humans, because the platform of our existence is based on the exact same thing. The same dysfunctional capacity is possible for everyone.
I just hate having all this stuff, and the only way to be happy is to put it all away. Okay, yeah.
Anthony, do you know how many times you've brought that up in this conversation?
It's just killing me.
Well, it isn't killing you.
It is.
No.
Slowly.
What's
Very
killing,
slowly.
what you think is killing you doesn't even exist. That's what's killing you. I'm not laughing here. I'm telling you that what you think exists that doesn't exist is what
Yeah.
is killing you. Think of
Yeah.
how much justification you have to give it to think it's killing you when all it is a delusion of your own thinking.
Yeah, and I don't like how when you got serious, I started laughing. That was weird.
Anthony,
Yeah.
if we're doing this with potato chips, or we're doing it with alcohol, or we're doing
Yeah.
it with gambling, or we're doing it with sex, or we're doing
Shopping.
it with our relationship, shopping, having, in any way, it's the same problem. To think of it in all the various ways we do it is to get lost in the camouflage of imagining that we have to fix every one of those potential
Yeah.
things. And like you and I talked about, I think this last week, if you take a penny and multiply it for 30 days, it turns into a cumulative, I believe, $11 million.
Yeah.
Now think of trying to fix every one of those thoughts that's based on the exact same wrong thought, and all the tree branches that have spread and all the stems
Yeah.
since we started thinking this thing is now into the thousands, if not tens of thousands of little behaviors we've developed. And to think of them as each needing your attention because they're unique to you is missing the common nature of the problem, is the same between all of us. It doesn't have to have the same circumstances and the same face on it and the same time and the same place to be common in nature, because we're starting to track back the problem as being central to the idea that we can create reality and truth in a thought, rather than we can imagine whatever we want. And as imagination, there's nothing wrong with that. That's a beautiful creation, because we can imagine doing things that we might think are impossible and actually achieve things that were thought to be impossible, but were always impossible, that were always possible. They just weren't thought to be possible. So to think something's impossible that's possible doesn't mean it's impossible. It simply means we think it's impossible, so we're not going to act on that possibility. We're going to act against it. To begin to notice that all internal conflict is reckoning with this, is to start to see wherever it manifests, it's the same problem in the same way at the source. It's delusion. It's insanity. It isn't true, and it won't be true. And if it is true, it does not need us to think about it, because it already exists as a possibility. And the possibility of us even imagining we could realize that possibility is very, very limited when all we're fixated on are the obsessive thoughts we have that have no basis in reality at all. That constant swirling around that and thinking we're going to get better by thinking more about the thinking that's actually making us worse is the insanity of the mental addiction and the mental illness. It's all the various disorders, anxious disorders, metabolic disorders, cardiovascular, nervous systems. All of that stuff in our body is undermined by this constant harping and this constant attempt to make believe that if we can divide off our problems from everyone else's and they're unique enough, we can solve it and all be better while everyone else suffers. If you can double a penny for a month and turn it into $11 million, imagine trying to half your problems by splitting them off every day for a lifetime. What you're talking about. You're talking in the trillions.
Yeah.
Now, to think of that as trillions would seem impossible if it were a problem in each one of those thoughts, which is what we tend to do sickly. We think we need to stop these things, right? We've talked about this a lot. We think we need to stop the effect while we're ignoring the cause. If something doesn't exist that we think is causing an effect that's a delusion, what is there to stop? We're not even starting it. We're just maintaining the idea in the present that it's something that's real, that it's something that's true, that it's something that's plaguing us, that if I think about it more, it's going to get better. And all I'm thinking about is a delusion being real in the present. That's all that it is.
Yeah.
So if I come to terms with that in the present, you know how many of those other things that are out there that you think are problems go away? I'll tell you right now, they don't even exist except to the thinking you do about them. And to the degree you think there's a lot.
Yeah, I got the last question wrong. I was right on it. He said they don't even exist. I'm like, oh, that wrong number.
You're doing.
No, but what I don't agree with is you said the uniqueness of our problems so that we're separate and apart from everybody else. I think that part of the healing is realizing and expanding our awareness to the fact that we're all connected, and my responsibility lies in raising the vibe for all of us cumulatively.
Well, it doesn't need to be risen if it isn't depressed.
Correct.
It's already risen. And I don't think I said, I think I was talking about the delusion that we have that our problems are unique to us, that
Right.
we create to feel separate and feel that the impossibility of our own situation is that we haven't separated ourselves fully to deal with the thing by isolating ourselves and thinking about it. This is a little broader than I went, but the point is, we have the idea that it's our problems we need to solve, like Anthony's problem about cleaning up and being happier when he sees things in order.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
It's interesting that if your interior was in order, you wouldn't see messes as anything other than a mess. And it wouldn't have that obsessive connection to you. You
Wow.
could easily clean it up and you could easily let it stay. That's the state of neutrality. It's the freedom to see that
Yeah.
we have the choice. We're always making choices. We're never condemned, which is odd that we use the word choice to say it's our only choice. If it were our only choice, it's an instinct and we would just be acting on it naturally.
I'm going to be really honest here too. I realized that really I was afraid of the mess. Like I have a lot of paperwork and some bills I didn't want to see. And I didn't want to go next to it.
That's the same fear of death, Anthony.
Yeah. And I just realized it's just papers. I got them and I didn't even look. I just organized them in a pile. And I'm like, yeah.
Let's back up rather than dismissing the thing. Let's back up to the point about the fear. If you're witnessing fear in relation to papers, and I understand this because so many things happen that aren't expected because I've been thinking so long my thoughts are real and true that all that should ever happen is what I think will happen.
Yeah.
So if anything happens that I don't think should happen, I get caught off guard.
Yes.
Overwhelmed. But why would that be? Because I've created limited thoughts as my only potential future. Now, where the fear really is thinking that if I have all possibility, that I'm safer by imagining only a few of those possibilities are only possible. Think of that. I'm diminishing my capacity in the name of saving myself, and the self I'm saving doesn't even exist. And yet the experience I'm having as a human is undermined, and literally my bodily functions are threatened by this line of thinking.
And that all happens in a split second.
Well, in every split second. Think of a split second. Think of the atomic bomb. It's a split atom. We use the terms in seconds because we think that is a small amount of time.
Voice. That was beautiful.
Well, it all ties together, and the absurdity of the words we use will become clearer in terms of what they're actually trying to attempt, which is to reveal to us that we know more than we're thinking. And we say things accurately and then use the connotation that we don't know what we're doing and don't think that's what we mean.
Yeah, and in 50 years, when I'm telling people, I knew Jack Hawk. He told us exactly all that. He was cleaning his teeth. He knew this stuff so well, he could clean his teeth and figure out the problems of the world.
I'm flossing.
They're like, no fucking way. You did not know
Anthony,
him.
The point of this conversation is that you too know, we all know, if there is, sorry, we've got some military.
We're going to take a military break now.
A bunch of helicopters just went overhead. If this absolute knowing is knowing, then it isn't thinking. So it isn't based in our brain. So it can't be based in our body. So
And do you know why it's not thinking?
Because it's knowing.
Yeah. I got that from you. I love that.
But if it isn't in our brain and it isn't in our body, then our life does not depend on our brain or body, and our body is at our disposal, and to dispose of its functional capacity today for any reason is based on thinking. The reasons come from thinking, not knowing.
I'm hearing you say we need to order a pizza. With some chips.
I'm thinking, what kind?
Yeah. This is really helpful. I love this. It's really, really inspiring.
Where's Lincest today?
Oh, I'm supposed to tell you that Lindsay's, she is unable to make it today, but she misses everybody and will be there next week for sure.
All right. We'll look forward to hearing from her then. So, Melissa,
fell asleep.
I think she may be.
I love that picture she has. It makes
Monitoring
me so.
Gabriel.
I love that dog.
Hi, sorry, I was just trying to, I had it on mute and I was just trying to get it on. I'm trying to make the
That's all
background
right.
noise not be around.
So you're brand new to this, and I want to mention just what I was saying to Anthony. And it may come as startling, and it may come with disbelief, and it may come as a threat to some of the thoughts you have. But or it may seem like it anyhow. That's, how things seem is not how they are. They are how they are, regardless of how they seem, and how they seem is how we think they are. So if this nature that we're talking about is absolute, and it's been talked about through history as infinite and absolute and omnipotent and omniscient and all powerful, all those things have been used, and yet we don't tend to think of them in that way. We think of them as selective and exclusive and sometime and maybe and kind of, and only when I think I'm feeling it could it be there, rather than it's there regardless of what I think. Because I'm feeling it's there doesn't mean it's not there. It just means I feel my thoughts that think it's not there because I'm relying on those thoughts as being reality. I don't imagine reality could be anything other than my thoughts. Right?
It's a lot.
Yeah, well, exactly. So why I'm saying this to you, and I appreciate it, when we spoke the first time, you had my experience was you had a very clear awareness to just like, imagine you tilted your head back, and I remember you just said, wow. And
Yeah.
part of this is beginning to realize that we've simply this isn't something new to you and I and the current generation and all this. This has been common throughout human history, because human history has been littered with groups of people fighting groups of people in the name of God.
Or territory.
Same thing.
Mm-hmm.
This is ours, not yours. What is the territory? The earth was given to all of us, not some of us, all of us. So we're fighting over people, places, and things in the name of a power that's supposed to be infinite. And yet we're fighting over it as though it needs us to determine its best interests. Pretty obscene and absurd. So if there's an absolute knowing nature that's loving, there isn't any conflict in that. There's no need for conflict in that, because it doesn't have any inner conflict like we do when we start thinking that things are real and true simply because we think they are, rather than notice that reality and truth does not need us to think about it at all to be. And if you're sober, which I suspect remembering you are, think you just had 2 years, the whole idea of powerlessness in the first step is starting to realize that it's not the alcohol we were powerless over, it's the thought that we could control and enjoy it that we were powerless over, because we couldn't control or enjoy it. If we controlled it, we couldn't enjoy it. If we enjoyed it, we couldn't control it. So it was the thought about it, my experience, that I tried to prove right by thinking the lie was true. So I spent all my drinking days and all my stoner days trying to do more and more and more of it to prove that it didn't have any effect on me, while I was pleading for the effect to put me out of the misery I was creating by thinking that way and living that way.
Wow. So the truth is not a lie.
Very good, Anthony. So part of this reckoning is starting to see that absolute things aren't in pieces. They don't come apart. The opposite of them is the same. Any small piece that you could consider is the whole. Starting to see that that's the reality of life. That's the reality of existence. That's the reality of essence. And it can't be mine and not yours simply because you don't think it is, nor could it be anyone else's anywhere else and be any of ours. So if it's ours and we can claim it or recognize it, we are also recognizing it for everyone else. So we, rather than becoming repulsive, become somewhat attractive in terms of this magnetism that goes on in this human existence we're having, and can draw people like ore is driven. Remember running magnets through dirt and the ore is attracted to the magnet? Sand, whatever it is. There's ore in all of it. It gets attracted to it because it connects naturally to it. And magnets line up. If you try to put the opposing terminals together, they always resist. If you put the other ones together, they immediately line up. They'll flip around immediately if they get near each other to align properly.
Wow.
So what we're talking about is looking at the mechanics of thought and starting to see that our brain is a bit of a computer. And if we put bad information into it, we're going to get gobbledygook out of it. And not only that, we're going to think of it as something happening to us rather than by us, because the whole irresponsibility of initiating thoughts that are thought to be true and real is insane. And insanity is a reversal. It's the attempt to maintain the idea that what isn't real is real, and that reality then thus becomes not real. It's exactly what a lie is. A lie claims to be the only thing it can't be, which is true. And it's only a lie as long as someone somewhere thinks of it as true. As soon as a lie is a lie, what is it? True. Boom, gone. No energy in it. Nothing. So entertaining these thoughts rather than entertaining the successive thoughts, you'll notice, and it can be very disturbing, and this is
And let's use the right word, because whenever I'm having a problem, it's not entertaining. When you say entertaining these thoughts, right? It's anything but entertaining.
well, Anthony, the idea that you are entertained by sick things is what insanity is. I mean, to think about it as forced or having to do it is another mistaken idea, but in fact, we're entertaining them.
Or like when an alcoholic calls it a cocktail. I'm having a cocktail.
If what I'm doing right now is the only time, the only place, the only thing I can do, and what I'm doing right now is maintaining ideas that are untrue, I am imposing an experience on my present experience, my present thought life, not my life, that isn't true. And it's delusional. And to any degree, I'm maintaining thoughts, and I can guarantee you I maintain thoughts that aren't true, that I haven't come to terms with in that regard. But I know, to the point earlier, Anthony, I know that all of them qualify under this exact same banner. And that meditation and prayer is effectively beginning to notice that all of my choices have been prayers, and they've always been answered. And when the prayers are sick prayers for sick things, I never want to accept the circumstances and the consequences as something I did. So I say, I didn't mean this.
And just for a little transparency for the group, because I owe it, I have this briefcase that I really love, right? I took it somewhere. I got all these comps. So I had to have another one. It's really expensive. I'm not going to say how much, but I went and I bought one. And then I felt good about it, but I found a better deal within a little while. So I bought that one, telling myself I'm going to return the other one, knowing that I'm not going to really return it, probably, right? So it's this, and I don't want to tell anybody. It's like so terrible. I'm trying not to get stuff. I'm mad at myself for not being able to keep it organized. And now I have 3 of these very expensive briefcases. And I don't want to tell it. It's that secret that if you guys knew what had just happened after I'm trying not to buy anything, you would think I'm crazy. And it is crazy.
No. I think you're crazy. And it has nothing to do with the briefcases. You think, Anthony, that telling all the various stories are going to help us understand you. And I think it's fairly...
No, I'm saying that's a problem. I'm really not doing that. I'm saying I'm embarrassed to say, because that's my...
But you're admitting in this situation, you're embarrassed, but you could admit that without telling the story, because it's part of your present awareness to know.
Well, it's just not a random thought. It's like the reason I feel that way is because of the story.
But Anthony, listen to what you're saying. The story now is responsible. It's because of the story.
Definitely.
Yeah. It's a random, you just said it's a random idea. It's just happening on its own. No, it's not.
Well, the problem is I still haven't, I still could return one of them. But
Anthony, stop going further. You're just digging a hole. You can continue this line of thinking, but it's never going to end. And if you're here and interested in seeing that it's never really beginning, other than your present insistence in telling the story and thinking you really are going to illuminate everybody by telling us more and more about the thinking you're doing, that's insane.
No, I didn't tell you the price. I just said expensive.
Doesn't matter. You think somehow that's some magical component in all this that would make it all make sense. It doesn't. It doesn't make sense if it's a penny or a tenth of a penny or a grain of sand. It's irrelevant.
What if it really was only $10 and I was struggling this much with a $10 briefcase? That would be pretty cool.
No, it would probably feel to you to be even sicker that it would still bother you. But
No, I'd be
assure
okay
you,
with it. If it was $10, I'd be like,
Anthony,
never. I wouldn't even bring it up.
Anthony, your repetition is evidence of your chronic thoughts about your thinking. It's all that it is. It's relying over and over and over again on your thoughts and thinking you're going to get your thoughts right. We were just on the verge of talking about our choices being prayers that are always answered, that we want to act as though we didn't like the results of and think they shouldn't be happening because we're afraid to admit the sickness of the thought caused it. And
I should just look at it as a good thing. Like, yeah, so what? I got 3 briefcases now. Is that a problem?
Anthony, you're looking for another way to have it and not at the source of the issue that you have. You're trying to get out of it, trying to change it in some way. We've talked about the teeter-totter enough. The point is, if you're choosing it, there's something going on with you in your thinking that you don't even think you're thinking to cause that. And the fact that you don't think you're thinking it is why you think it's happening to you, because you can't imagine why you would possibly continue to subject yourself to this sort of insanity.
Well, if we're talking about it, obviously it's a possibility.
So the point I was about to make when we got to hear about the briefcases, which wasn't that brief, the case wasn't as brief as it could have been, is that
Oh my God, that's funny.
Our prayers are our choices. We're always praying for something we want. And when we're praying for sick things, we get them and then disavow having anything to do with it and start this terminal cycle over again. And our meditation is the greater knowingness that something wrong. Now, I'm going to suggest to you, just like I did Melissa a minute ago, and it's really to everyone listening, but I'm singling out the conversations to bring a little connection to what we're talking about, is that, not as though it's disconnected, by the way, but just to point to the travel that we're doing, the trails that we're taking, is that if you didn't know what you know, you wouldn't be confounded by what you're thinking. You wouldn't feel disturbed by it.
Good
You
point.
wouldn't feel that it was something that was really bothering you, $10 or $10,000. You wouldn't feel that any more than you would feel that the mess has this compelling need to draw you in. Think of how you think that mess has so much control over you. An inert object that just sitting there, a sheet, some bed, whatever, your pillows, whatever it is that's out of place, all of a sudden has this extraordinary power over your life. When it's the thought you have that's primary to all of your interactions, Anthony, not just the briefcase and not just the pillow and not just the mess and not just her and not just the cars and not all the other stories, all of them is based on the idea that your thinking is reality. And the more you use it, the better you get. When the more you use it, the better you get at not reckoning with the source of the problem you think you have. And so you tell us more and more stories about it in different ways and think somehow those little details are going to have us just crystallize and say, well, you finally got it.
And also, I do feel better. You know how they say if you just say your worst secret, and you feel like, I feel more, I don't feel like I'm hiding that. I feel like I can't be part of the group if I'm going, I just bought
the sickness of thinking you're hiding it is sick because it's never hidden. You're always nervous. You're always prone to speak. You're always prone to say something, to jump in, to interrupt, to make your point, to explain a new story. All those things aren't something that just happens here. That's what's happening 24 hours a day for you, to the degree that you're maintaining those thoughts. It's typical. It's common. You think it's unique to you. It's not. It just happens to be what you're doing and the way you're doing it, which I'm doing in the way I do it. And yet it's the same thing ultimately as a denial of what's actually happening and a reckoning with things I don't even think I'm thinking that cause it.
I'm keeping both of them.
So exactly. Good answer. begin to notice that they're happening at any time. There's always things we think we're not doing. And the chance to become aware of that is to begin to concede that there are things I'm doing that I don't think I'm doing that are causing the problems I think are the most difficult to solve, because I haven't come to terms with the fact that I'm thinking of these things and causing them regardless of whether I think I'm thinking of them. The idea that I can go numb to things and pretend they're not there is the idea that ignoring things is intelligent rather than ignorance. It's just starting to come to terms with this stuff in the broadest way, the most fundamental way. And in my experience, the most fundamental idea I have is that my thoughts create reality. And when I do, all I think of is that I'm all that I think, and I become hypersensitive about what everyone else thinks. And I think I become very competitive with what everyone else has, because now I think who they are is what they have and what they do, rather than they have any essence at all. I just reduce them to the same thing I've reduced my own experience to. And I become very susceptible to what they think and very defensive. What they think is offensive to me because I'm defensive over my own thinking. And that pretty well defines human history in terms of fighting and warring and pettiness and people sort of segregating themselves amongst others who think like they do because they're so susceptible to other people's thinking. They don't want to get near them because they think they're toxic and they're insane and they're...
How about if you argue about things that you don't know about? Like if you love hiking is your passion and you're an expert, you don't get in a lot of shouting matches with people about hiking because you know about hiking. You're not on the defensive, but anything you're not really sure about, now you got to fight, whether it's politics or something else, because you don't really know, so you argue. Is that possible?
Anthony, if you can think you're not doing what you're doing, you could certainly make believe you know enough about hiking to argue over it. It may not occur to you that quickly because you think things are hidden and can be hidden. And I'm
saying you don't usually argue about things that you really know about. It's just things you're not really sure about.
It's not things you really know about. You don't argue about it. It's things that are obvious to you that you know would be insane to argue over. So the things you think you're oblivious to become completely open for the fight. Meaning, I didn't do it. I didn't know I was doing it. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I didn't mean to step on your toe.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to do. We mean to do all those things, and we get mean thinking we don't, or that we're not. The fact is, Anthony, we are completely aware of what we're doing, and the thinking that we do about it is what gives us the impression that we're oblivious. And if that's how we're utilizing our thinking, that is not a healthy form of utilization, because we're making believe that being numb and being desensitized becomes our highest point and our best use of something that's designed to be sensitive as a result of its ability to be aware of what's actually happening. So any diminished capacity on our part is being caused by the ideas we have that are diminished in their nature, in the thinking we're doing. Choosing, by the way.
Yeah, that sounds good, Jack. Thanks for your help.
So
this wasn't
part of it, I was on the verge of meditation and prayer, given that Melissa's...
We all are, Jack, 24 hours a day.
Exactly. So a real quick point also is that the second step is coming to believe in a power greater than ourselves that can restore us to sanity. It's admitting in the first step that we're insane. And if we were insane over alcohol or heroin or crack or meth or any of those things, those are just pinpricks of symptoms that reflect all other symptoms that we suffer or struggle from physically. It's the same idea that I can control and enjoy my thinking that gives me the impression that the more I do it, the better I'll get. And what I'm getting better at is denying that it always leads to me realizing I'm out of control and not enjoying it at all. So if the restoration to sanity is sanity, our present state of awareness is a meditative aware state, which is a constant meditation. And our constant harping and choices we make, or the constant choices we make, because no thought that isn't acted on is expressed. Even speaking is an action on that thought.
And I've been working. I feel good also because I told that story, but also because I've been cleaning and I went out to the garage. I'm like, why am I so upset? And I look, it's a Carrera GT Rolling Thunder set. I'm like, oh my God, take that in the house. Everything, it's going to be great. But rather than the fear of what's the mess,
But you see how you're avoiding it, Anthony. You're just looking.
I'm like, I looked at it. This is the Carrera GT set.
You're looking for a new excuse to think there's something else that's going to fix the something else you think you're not doing.
Oh, but it worked.
No, it just gave you a temporary impression that you will be upset by next week about.
Yeah, let's see. I'm going to test that.
How long have we done this together now, you and I? 3 years? 4 years?
I think it's like 4. You know how time flies by.
Okay. So would you say you've resolved it?
Say what?
Have you resolved it?
Apparently everything. Apparently everything.
Have you resolved it?
What's it?
The ongoing disturbance in your experience that creates.
Yes. Before today's show, honestly, no. But after what you said, it changed my whole life.
Well, Anthony, it isn't your whole life that changed because.
Damn it! I could never win around this place.
It isn't about winning. It's about talking honestly.
But go ahead with that. I'll try to
haven't done
What do you mean it's not about changing my life? Go ahead.
Your life is not the circumstances you're leading. Your life is our life. Your life is life. Life is not something that changes. Life is the possibility for all change to occur. Life is an absolute nature, like the absolute nature of the infinite and the absolute and the unlimited and the
trademarking that.
Huh?
Trademarking that.
It's already the nature of everything. It doesn't need to be trademarked or patented. It's just how things are. So it isn't to suggest, Anthony, that I don't do the things you're doing. I simply recognize the things I do a little better. I wouldn't say great, better than I used to when what I used to do was worse. So the growth, if there's any maturity in all this, good morning, Jackie. If there's any maturity in this, if there's any ripening in this, if there's any adultness in this, it's just beginning to notice, oh, these things I do that cause those conflicts are things I'm choosing to do that aren't healthy. They're sick, they're imagined, they're not reality. They're simply delusions that I imagine are reality to imagine the suffering that I manifest to prove their reality, rather than just like a dream or watching a scary movie is going to create bodily sensations. It doesn't mean the actors on the screen are dying. It's a projection. It's the same with our thinking. It's a projection, a narrative that we develop about things. And we tend to attach those things to stories that come with all the people and all the places and all the stuff that we're imagining because we get this movie going on in our head and make believe it's true. So my goal here is to speak honestly, not to contest your thoughts, but to align your capacity to begin to express your honest knowingness in a way that begins to allow you to recognize the difference between the two experiences sufficiently to begin to start to ask yourself, do I want to continue to live in this sense of fear, this sense of displacement, this sense of frustration, the sense of ongoing turmoil, or would I like to choose otherwise? Would I like to just begin to stop and say, wow, if I'm already intact, maybe if I talked about it that way, a lot of this other stuff would just evaporate. And I guarantee you it will, because it has nothing more keeping it in play but your constant thinking about it as reality and truth. It's the same for me. It's not different for me in that regard, because if we share anything, we share everything that's real. And the wrong here isn't necessarily.
It's funny when you're saying all that stuff. I feel like I don't like to listen to it, but then you go, same as me. I'm like, okay, well, then I'm okay with it.
Yeah, well, you know why?
Because it's both of us, and it's all right.
It's probably accurate. It's probably not a lie. When you feel your sensations will change and feel at peace. They won't feel excited. They won't feel depressed. They'll just feel content because there's content in honesty. And honesty doesn't mean only saying the thing we think is right. Honesty is starting to admit the things, just like you just did, the things that are wrong openly, and just
Thanks,
say,
Jax.
wow, I'm doing this. I'm doing
Thank you,
this.
brother. We love you guys.
So the right,
It was that dog. I could not look at that picture and not tell the truth. I'm like,
the right that we have to think what we want doesn't mean what we think is right. And if we're honest about how we're thinking, you'll quickly see that we are perfectly designed to recognize when we're off course and have the absolute freedom to correct our course. Sobriety in general, just like emotional sobriety, sobriety is a sane living relative to a compulsion that we have that's killing us. Not everybody who drinks gets to the point where their drinking kills them. So any of us who've struggled with that generally got to a point where we said, you know what, this isn't good for me. I can't keep doing this. Emotional sobriety is sane living. It's beginning to apply basic principles, which are always basic and always principled, to everything that we're doing and starting to see that they're already applied. I'm just not always applying my thinking to them. I'm just not always applying my human experience to them. And to any degree that I dysfunction, I'm going to feel the conflict as a result and see that my bodily experience is uniquely designed to give me notice that I know, to put me on notice, to signal an alarm when I'm wrong, thinking I'm right. It isn't the wrong that's the problem. It's thinking it's right that creates the seeming incessant, interminable cycle that goes on and on and on and on. That seems like I can't get off. It's a merry-go-round that's not so merry. I can't get off. It's not true. It's just a part of the same sick thought, generating the idea that I need to maintain it to keep the life of the thought alive when the thought doesn't have any life in it because the content of it is complete fantasy imagined to be real. The fact that we can create effects does not make things real anymore.
spoiler alert.
Yeah. Any more than a horror movie that scares us or that any drama or comedy has us react. It doesn't mean those people are there. We're seeing images of them. And that's exactly.
Spoiler alert. The monsters aren't there and neither are you.
Well, but don't be lulled into thinking that we can't be demonstrative in our creations mentally to give us impressions that seem real that are false. This is about starting to notice the subtlety of this rather than trying to get rid of it like we do with a drug and think that because we don't feel that it's not there while it's there growing.
Yeah, and actually I'm looking in my room. There's a pile of clothes that built up. They do that so easily by you let one go. Well, I'm just going to leave it there for a second, you tell yourself, right?
Anthony, the pile didn't grow. You grew the pile. Think of it, how you say it. Is that as though all those pants and clothes just marched in there and said, you know what? Let's screw with Anthony today.
Yeah. And then you don't want to touch it. Like, I don't want to go near it. And then it's like, it just builds. So now I'm just looking, it's just a matter of action.
Think of the thoughts as actions. And if you're experiencing that with a pile of clothing that is inert, imagine how many other things you take to be real and happening as a result of them doing it rather than you causing it.
None.
In reality, yes. In your thinking, probably not. You wouldn't have obsessions, Anthony, if you weren't maintaining thoughts that aren't true, as true. Again, that being wrong, our body is designed to let us know when we're wrong so we can adjust. When we're healthy, we're adjusting immediately like a sailor at sea, quickly, till before he's so far off course that he's going to run into another continent that he's got to get around, or she.
I didn't realize
the difference
until I put everything down. I didn't realize how heavy it was.
The sickness is not in the wrong thought, but thinking it's right. And then thinking the interminable consequence is nothing we had anything to do with. And if we think we have nothing to do with it because it's happening to us, we don't think there's anything we can do about it. And the fact is, wherever we are now is always where we are, always where everything that happens, happens. And if anything's happening we don't like, where it's healed is now. And if it's delusional, it's coming to terms with the fact that it's a delusion being thought to be real. That's all that it is. Doesn't even give you anything to let go of. It's just the beginning of noticing how quick we are to act on those thoughts and think there's something we need to stop, rather than realize I keep restarting the same thought over and over again, wondering why it's difficult to stop. It's not hard to stop at all. When you don't start, there's nothing to stop. And I would also suggest that something that doesn't exist doesn't start or stop. To come to terms with insanity is to begin to realize that we've been taking it so seriously as to making believe it's actual reality. It's exactly what insanity is, because you know what the guarantee of insanity is that we think we're sane.
Yeah.
So each of us, nobody can do this for any of us. And yet each of us can do this by looking at what we're doing and noticing that the disturbances are always disturbed as a result of a thought that's disturbed, and the disturbing nature of it is never true, and it means it's never real. It's always simply imagined. Now, if this is the case, imagine the capacity of our imagination to solve problems rather than make problems. If it were utilized in a healthy manner where we got used to the guidance system that our body offers, the awareness that it offers us, the signals that it sends us, the body language, we become functionally literate, literally by reading our body language and starting to interact with it and say, thanks, that's good information. Something doesn't seem right. Maybe I had to stop walking as quickly as I am. And start to notice that we have a very intuitive awareness of what's going on around us that isn't coming from our thinking. It's coming from an absolute present state of knowing that we all share and we're all aware of. It's impossible not to if it exists. If it doesn't exist, which obviously is a great contention, has been through history, but if it didn't exist, we would not struggle. With our struggles, we would think we were reaching the highest point possible, because struggling would be all we would have to do. And it wouldn't feel bad, wouldn't feel wrong. It would feel right, because it would be the only thing we could do. There would be no other option, literally. So the deception of addiction by saying there's no other option is a lie, because there's absolutely an option, because the one we're choosing isn't even an option. It's a delusion. It's a complete make-believe. It's like being three wearing a costume of being a fireman and then being sent in by the parents to put out the fire. That would be crazy.
That'd be a great reality show.
Exactly what we're doing.
We should do a reality show based on that. Thanks, Jack. It's been very helpful.
This is a reality show.
Sorry for interrupting you all the time. There's a part of me that likes that. Not only do I interrupt you, I interrupt myself.
Well, I would say you don't have a self to interrupt, so you use that as an excuse to claim you're doing it.
Yes.
Anthony, you've grown a lot. You're a good man. You struggle. It's okay to talk about it. As you have, you've gotten better. As you have, your awareness has gotten better. As you have, you've said things with great clarity. And part of this idea of doing this publicly, not only between multiple people, six or eight typically, is starting to see that it's an opportunity to do it 166 of the other hours during the week, and start to interact with people on a more honest level, and start to notice that we're able to say the things we think we shouldn't. And sometimes that's what actually leads to a healthy relationship, because it gives them the freedom simultaneously that they might have thought they didn't have, to begin to share those same things. And the beauty of nature is that if you do it a little, you get it all. Just like I mentioned earlier about the absolute. The opposite of the absolute is absolute. So there's never any risk. The tiniest thought of it is all of it. There's never risk of having too much or too little in relation to it.
Yeah.
So if we start thinking naturally, the wisdom and the knowledge will become natural And you'll say things you were even caught off guard by, literally noticing that your guard is starting to fall. And the defensive nature of the reactive ideas about your only life being that sort of constant state of protectiveness and defensiveness and reactiveness and anxiety and stress, that's being who you are, start to diminish, because you realize that's just a consequence of the thinking you've been doing that has no basis, that has no place, that is disconnected from reality because it has no place. It doesn't even exist. And we're feeling our thinking. Primarily, our feelings in our body are feeling what we're thinking, because we think so much of our thinking. We think all that anything is only what we think of it, just like we think we happen to be only what we think. So starting to look at the world, you'll start noticing the world's giving you a lot of information you haven't been listening to. And not only is it capable to hear it, but to listen to it. And not only capable to listen to it, but to hear it simultaneously, because we've always been hearing it. We've just been busy trying to make believe we weren't, to justify the sickness of the thinking. As that begins to dilute and dissolve, literally, not resolved over and over and over again, thinking you got to make it better and feel better and get away from it. It's dissolved, literally. It just diminishes. It's like a smoke in the air. You can blow from across the room and watch it sort of vanish. It starts to dissolve. There's nothing there but what's being maintained by resisting reality and truth and thinking it's possible that resistance is even possible. That's the joke of it. When you begin to realize that it's never been possible to resist reality and truth, because it doesn't change. It becomes insane to continue to entertain that thought, Anthony, begins to dissolve the tendencies and the impulses and the reactivity and the defensiveness that tends to lead to the compulsions and such. So I got some distance to go in that. And I don't know that it's distance. It's being more aware of my present state that I'm always present in, and start to take apart the mythology of my conversation that's been representing cultural ideas that aren't true, and starting to speak on terms that are more accurate than the other terms I relied on when I continued to perpetuate this thinking. We're in it together. We share it, all of it. And what we think we do separately is just designed to give us the impression we're alone and can't be helped, and at everyone else's disposal and effect of everyone else, and we're victims to everyone else. It's just imagination. It's not reality.
Thanks, Jack. You did an amazing job. Thanks, everybody, for listening about my brief story.
It would be impossible to do anything well if there weren't others to do it with. And so the focus here is not on what I do, but what we all do. Because the fact is that our experience isn't only based on what we're thinking, but if the present is where everything happens, then it's what we're thinking about everything that impacts us. Because what seems to be out of sight is also impacting everything that is within sight and within our reach. So there is no, any more than the horizon ever hid the rest of the world from people who didn't see it, the rest of the world was going about what it was doing, regardless of whether it was seen. It's the same with the limits of our thinking. Even when we're thinking people aren't there and things aren't happening, we're still witnessing the sum total of all that is happening wherever we are. And that means right now. So it's the inclusion of everybody and starting to see, if this is your capacity, Anthony, then it's also my capacity. And it's Melissa's capacity. And Jackie's and Gabe and JP's, Jana, everyone who comes and everyone who's there and everyone who exists. Because it's the nature of existence, not just the things we see, the things we think about, the things we think are there. So on that point, to think we have no influence is to miss the fact that we're influencing everything all the time. To think we want to see the change in the world that isn't happening is to miss the fact that we're already seeing the change we're making in the present. And if we don't like the change we're making, we're certainly not going to change it to the better by making believe we're not seeing it now, because we'll just recreate a new mess to make believe has nothing to do with us. rather than start to act in ways that actually begin to speak to everyone, everywhere, regardless of whether they're listening, because we infect and affect the totality of everything with everything that we do all the time in terms of thinking and actions. That interactive, it's like a huge transmission with gears. Every little gear that moves some other gear to make it all work. We can seem small, and yet we're part of the whole. How we seem is not how things are. How things seem is not how things are. Things are how they are, or as they are. We are as we are. We are as things are. The essence of those things is the same essence we share. It's why things in the universe seem to know exactly what to do without thinking. Atoms and molecules and all the things we haven't even named yet that are currently active right now, absolutely doing what they're doing exactly as they're designed to do it without any question whatsoever. And we sit here on a little tiny planet asking why over and over and over and over again, not noticing the absolute state of our unquestionable awareness and knowing isn't a question at all. And it isn't in doubt. And there is no uncertainty in it. And to begin to think in those terms is to begin to stabilize the thinking so that we can begin to express that reality rather than think it's up to us to make it up. That's our mission, our purpose. I propose.
Thanks, Jack. I got a lot of cleaning still to do. I look, I don't, to be honest too, it's not as good as I thought it was going. It's even worse right now.
But Anthony, listen.
Oh my God, it's terrible, Jack.
For everyone, let me mention that as this stabilization occurs, the lens of your seeing, because understanding is how we see things that don't seem visible, the lens of that understanding is going to get clearer, and you're going to see the depth of the disturbance that you made believe was real. And it will be disturbing to look at that. But it will be the perfect opportunity, kind of like going to college and say, I've never studied algebra, and you get to start. You have no history in it at all. If we're starting to look at this fresh, as we are fresh right now, as the moment is new, you're going to see things that are disturbing, but by seeing them accurately and noticing what the source is, it's just a lie. It's just something being thought to be true that isn't true, a delusion. It starts to dissipate and vanish. And that's the practice. That's the experience, the expression, the exercise.
I heard a speaker say if you just were put in an F-16 fighter jet and expected to fly the thing, you wouldn't do too well.
Exactly. But yet, in this case, we already know what to do. We just haven't been utilizing it properly. So it seems absurd to imagine it could be so simple as already being known when all we tried to do was think we knew what to do and kept struggling and struggling and struggling to try to get to knowing what we did, when in fact the basis of existence was already that we knew the whole time. So that can be just talk about grief, Melissa. That can also be very grieving to realize how little time we've given to the experiences we've had with the people we've shared it with and the animals and the plants and the minerals, and start to realize that if I've been thinking this way, I've been acting this way, and I have not been interacting with things honestly and making believe that all they are is what I think. And as a result, I've been holding them in contempt and not relating to them at all while I've been trying to over-relate to the thinking I'm doing is all that they are. And there is some grief in that too.
And the good news is I haven't thought about a pizza since I brought it up a half hour ago.
And yet you bring it up again. Now I want a pizza.
I want chips, so thanks.
Pizza is like the ultimate food. It seems to be happy food throughout the entire world.
And what I've been doing too in admitting is I've been pretending the mess isn't there. That's the rest of the story. Like there's not really a mess, right? It's like once you look at the mess and you realize how overwhelming it is, it's pretty tough, but you realize, I hope, that you can clean it.
Well, Anthony, ultimately, if you're looking at it honestly, you're realizing that it isn't unclean. It's just the thoughts you're doing now about it as though it exists enough to be unclean. Just like the thoughts you have.
That's the way I told myself to rationalize it. It's like, so it's a little messy. So it's a little messy.
maybe, Anthony, you can notice how quickly you return to your rationale and your justification, which is all basically a churning of thoughts to resolve it. Because you've done that thinking it's all you could do for so long, you continue even in spite of beginning to be aware of this. But
Yeah.
it may be worth, in the middle of it, taking a breath. I think the book says, when agitated, pause, restraint of pen and tongue, things like that. That agitation is an indication that maybe the awareness of the agitation is sufficient, rather than all of the ideas you have about the things you need to fix and do and all that stuff that's exterior to the immediacy of that experience.
Yeah, and I just thinking my lying to myself, I'll do it later. I'll get to it later. That's just the lie I tell myself. I'll do it later. I don't have time now for it.
But you can do that. If you're free, you can say, I'm not doing it now. It's free, you're free.
Yeah, it never happens though. That'd be great if it'd be great if I really did something.
Anthony, think of it. If it's contaminated in your thinking, you're going to have it cause what you think is a contamination. To confirm the thinking is real because you think it's the pile of laundry that's causing it. You'll see this as you are willing.
What are you saying?
The contamination is in the thought, not in the pile of laundry.
Yeah, but that's an excuse I use to get the pile of laundry bigger, you know?
Anthony,
Don't be so hard on yourself. It's a pile of laundry.
can I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
Make the pile bigger and live with it a few days and start to actually see that you're perfectly capable of living with a pile of laundry that is done. You're perfectly capable, that all these insistent little things you think you need to fix and do are all maintaining the thinking you're doing by giving you the impression that if you can feel better, the problem's fixed.
Now, I know when I walk into the room and I see laundry on the floor, I'm upset every time I go in there. And when I clean it, I'm so happy every time I walk. It totally changes.
I know, and yet you're
outlook.
still talking about it. So it apparently isn't a long-term solution.
Well, if I could keep it clean, it would be.
Well, don't wear any clothes. That would solve that.
Done. That's the problem. What the?
I know that it's difficult when you're not ready to hear what's being said.
No, I heard that really loud. I never liked
you
clothes.
heard what you heard, and what it is gave you the impression that you solve it over and over again. Solving something over and over again is not a solution. You know what a solution in math is? A resolution.
Whoa.
Done. Period.
I like that.
It's over. 2 + 2 does not have to be recontemplated every time. Because it's done. That's what we're talking about here. That's what we're not.
And that's what I'm saying, not arguing about things you know about. Like, you don't argue a lot about 2 + if somebody says 2 + 2 is 6, you don't spend too much time
But
arguing.
forget about those tactile things and think about an absolute nature that is inarguable because it doesn't change whatsoever at any time ever. So whatever you do in thought has no bearing on it at all, but a huge bearing on your experience about reality and about truth. It's not bearing on reality and truth at all. It's bearing on Anthony's experience of reality and truth. That's it. That's what you struggle with. That's what that pile of laundry that has become so powerful in your thinking is doing. And Anthony, I'll tell you this. That same fear you have about that pile of laundry is exactly what you use to distract yourself from the thoughts you have about being afraid to die, when in fact what you're afraid of is letting that thought be realized for what it is, which is that it's never had any life. When that happens, you're going to start to see that the self you've been defending hasn't been you all along. It's been a completely imagined state of existence. And it hasn't been Anthony. Anthony's a name attached to a body that your parents gave you. It's an essence that isn't named and isn't something unique to you. It's something absolutely shared by all, which makes it not unique to anyone. It's not special to anyone. It's just nature. Just the absolute basis of existence. Inarguable, though we can argue against it, we can do all those things and make believe somehow it's possible when we're actually trying to make believe that what's impossible is possible. Another conflict, another impossibility being lived with as though it'll be possible someday. So the absolute nature of our existence is realizing that there is no death in life. There is no lie in truth. There is no delusion in reality. They're all functions of a brain's ability to think. And if I am utilizing that brain inaccurately and mistakenly, I'm going to have misgivings as a result. and my actions are going to cause me to think I have to have things, when the redundancy of that again shows how quickly we can make believe somehow there will be enough somewhere else when all there is here now. It's just a constant re-perpetuation, which is redundant, but it's exactly what obsessive thinking is. So
Do I have to give one of the briefcases back?
this is anything but a briefcase. Anyway, I love you guys. I love that you participate in this and bear
Thanks,
with
Jeff.
it. I know that it can be heady at times. I know that it can be difficult at times. I know that it can seem preposterous. But all of those things are simply in relation to the thinking that's being done, not reality, not truth. I know you know, you know. I know you're aware that you're aware. If there is any doubt about that, it's simply a thought that's doubtful. If there's any bad about that, it's simply a thought that's bad being true, being thought to be good. The one thing that happens in the thinking we do about what's wrong as being true is that we think it's right and become defensive about, we become righteous about what is wrong, which is exactly the same sort of righteous indignation that countries use to wage war against others and individuals use to kill others and dominate and suppress and oppress and hold hostage and all that kind of stuff. Probably those things are against the law because it's not natural. And we're talking about what's natural here and what's healthy. And to begin to consider it is a lot easier to deal with once you realize how uneasy you've been with the things you've been doing that aren't healthy and aren't natural and aren't usual and aren't normal. As they dissipate, that knowingness will absolutely become aware. You will become aware of that knowingness without any hesitation and say things well before you even think about them, and then think, how did I even know to say that? Because you'll start acting on the knowing rather than the thinking, and you'll see that thinking was always designed to allow the water to flow through it like a dam. We're dams making believe that we're not there to hold back water and keep wondering why we get run over and feel imperiled all the time. We are channels to express reality and truth. That's what our bodies are designed to do. And our thinking will absolutely know what to do when we're willing to admit the knowing nature of our existence and obviously allow that or allow our thinking to reckon with the obvious nature of that existence and have it do what it's designed to do, which is not pre-think it, but simply express it. That's what intuition is, knowledge beyond reason. There's no understanding. There's no thought in it whatsoever. There's no logic. None of that. There's no process. It's just knowing we know. Boom, done, easy. Love you guys.
Thanks, Jack. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Jack.
Thanks for
Great.
stopping by. Thanks, Gabe. Jackie, good to see you.
Bye.
Good to see you too. I like that you described it heady. It made me laugh, like thinking like, oh no, this isn't heady.
Something what?
When you called it heady, the conversation,
Yeah.
it made me laugh to think like, oh no, it's not heady because it's so heady.
Hey, can we do a couple minutes off the recording, Jack? Or no? Are you busy?
Well, I'd love to hear. I think everyone would love to hear what you have to say.
No,
Yeah.
I don't think so. I don't have anything.
Hey,
I thought it was
Melissa,
for
by
Jack.
the
I was
way.
doing it for Jackie.
Melissa, I appreciated our conversation.
Yes, I did. I do too. I appreciate our conversations earlier.
What's your dog's name? That is the cutest dog.
I want you to know. I want you to know that I'm available to you anytime. You have my number. So.
Yes, I do. His name is Levi.
Oh, that's right. And what was he thinking about right in that photo? What was happening?
Oh, he just wanted to be near me, and I had to create a Zoom account. So that at that moment, so I did.
That look on his face.
Yeah, he just wants
He
to be
doesn't
near
have
me.
his own account?
No, I should have an account for him.
Right? I would Zoom with him.
Signing off.